Let's bring in our panel to discuss it from both sides. First, we welcome David Niose, Legal Director for the American Humanist, and the Executive Director of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, Kristina Arriaga. We thank you both very much for your time and agreeing to appear here on America's Forum. David, seems we have at least two separate issues here: removing under God from the pledge and prayer in the school. Are you in favor of ridding the nation of both?
Generally speaking, yes. Certainly removing under God from the pledge. Many people don't know that under God was actually added to the Pledge of Allegiance in the 1950s during the McCarthy era. Before that, we were one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just one note, David, as you offer the pejorative of the McCarthy effort, the McCarthy era, it was President Dwight David Eisenhower working with the Knights of Columbus, scarcely the junior senator from Wisconsin, who led to the inclusion of under God in the pledge, just to make it historically accurate.
Oh, yes, but it's also historically accurate to describe 1954 as the McCarthy era, where there was a lot of fear. And ironically enough, by inserting under God into the pledge, we made the pledge divisible. Before that, we were one nation, indivisible. But by adding that, we defined patriotism in terms of God belief. Those who don't believe somehow now are portrayed as less patriotic. That's not right.
Let me ask you, Christine, should the phrase under God be removed from the pledge? And where do you differ with David on this question?
Oh, absolutely not. For the last 10 years, the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty has been defending keeping the words under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, and we have succeeded in every single court system. And the reason is the following. The words under God are not about the nature of God. It's not about who God is, it's about who we are. By using the words under God, what we're saying is that our rights do not come from the government, therefore the government cannot take them away. And this is an important fact and an act of patriotism when we put our hands over our heart and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I believe this argument basically gets down to the establishment of religion, and there has been growing jurisprudence that offering a prayer in a public place, or I think back to the case involving my native North Carolina, where on state-supplied maps there was a motorist's prayer, which was ultimately removed because the court said, oh, that deals with the establishment of religion, offering a prayer on a state-published piece of material dealing with maps. I guess it's a moot point now since everyone uses GPS. Let me move to the whole notion of prayer. Whether it is corporate or individual, whether it is allowed or silent, David, why shouldn't prayer be allowed in public schools, in your opinion?
Well, because public schools are the government, and the government should not be participating in religious activity that endorses one religious view as opposed to another. There are many Americans, in fact, a growing number, who are not religious and who do not believe in a deity. So for the government to be taking a role of saying, we're going to do this now, we're going to promote the idea that a Judeo-Christian God exists, is just wrong. It's taking sides. And I point out, we're not asking for the government to be anti-religion. We're just asking for neutrality.
Well, could that not be achieved even with a moment of silent prayer, as long as it's not led by those in authority, to have a moment for meditation?
Well, what we found is that these efforts to install a moment of silence are usually an effort to allow religion into the classroom. There's been motivation shown in that regard, and that's just not right. It's really just a covert way of bringing prayer into the classroom, and we need government neutrality on religion. There's no need for a moment of silence before the start of a school day.
Kristina, what is your take on what David has to say there?
What the American Humanist Society would like to do is to erase the word God from existence in any public aspect, whether it's at schools or whether it's the government. In 1961, President Kennedy, during his inaugural address, said it beautifully. The rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. What he was saying is that we are all responsive to something beyond the state. God is not a bad word. Religious people should not have to whisper in secret prayers. And the government can take a stance to allow the diversity of religious views in the public square. But that is not what the American Humanist Society wants. They want to eliminate God out of the public square entirely. That is not right, is not American, and is certainly not constitutional.
Kristina, let me continue with you. Many in the Christian community feel a type of selective persecution where Christian prayers in certain school districts, administrators will go to great lengths to silence any Christian prayers, but we've seen school districts pick up and actually force middle school students to find out more about Sharia, to actually live under Islamic conditions for what is called a classroom exercise. Kristina, what is your take on those endeavors?
School districts should have the freedom to allow prayer in school whenever it is voluntary. Of course, no one should be forced to do anything. Not even the Pledge of Allegiance is mandatory. No child is forced to say it. But in the long history of this country, prayer has always been part of public acts. For instance, just recently, the Supreme Court recognized in the town of Greece that legislative prayer can be allowed, that the government doesn't have to construct it or censor it, and that it can allow for the diversity of views. It's the same in the school systems. Throughout history, school systems have allowed for prayer to be said in schools as long as it's voluntary.
David, let me turn to you, and having come through school at a different time, but having served in the Congress of the United States in recent years, when I was Speaker Pro Tem, sitting there presiding over the House, I would sit under rostrum with the term, "In God We Trust." As I looked to the back of the chamber, there would be history's great lawgivers in profile, with the exception of Moses, full face, looking down. Basically, I thought it me sitting in the chair, that representation. Do you believe the House chamber should be remodeled to take away any slogans such as "In God We Trust," to take away the representations of history's great lawgivers on the back of the chamber? In other words, should we eliminate every vestige of any expression of spirituality or a higher power or things scripturally related in a chamber such as the United States House of Representatives?
Well, that's quite a question. I'll just say I'm not going to play the role of interior designer, but in terms of general terms of whether "In God We Trust" should be the national motto and whether it should be all over the place in public buildings, certainly not. "In God We Trust" is an affirmative statement. It's not just an allusion to religious heritage or that sort of thing. Same thing with "Under God." To say that we are under God is an affirmative statement, that we are as a nation under God. It's not a reference to philosophy or heritage. How many children do you think, or even teachers for that matter, could possibly know or understand that by saying we are one nation under God, we are referring to philosophy or heritage? These are very disingenuous arguments from the other side. And what these statements are, "In God We Trust, under God," they are affirmative statements about the existence of a deity. And that is a theological statement. It's not a patriotic statement. It's not anything but a theological statement. And that's why it's, generally speaking, conservative religious right groups that are most aggressive about insisting on these references remaining in public life.
Only a minute remains. In both the House and the Senate, there are chaplains, and each chamber begins the day in prayer. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. How is that sectarian, David? I'll let you get 20 seconds in, then Kristina with the last word. Go ahead, David.
Well, it's sectarian to have "In God We Trust" and references to theological deity. It just is not a liberal conservative statement. There are certainly even liberals who believe in God, and by promoting the idea of the existence of God, we are taking sides, not so much liberal conservative, but we're taking sides on God or no God, theism or non-theism.
Kristina, last word to you. You've got 15 seconds. Sorry about that, but go ahead.
Our founding fathers recognize that our rights come from something beyond the state, that our rights are inalienable. And every time we mention God, whether in Congress or in schools, we are recognizing that principle.
And we will leave it right there. We thank you both for your time.